Hi there, my name is Marty Owings, and today we're going to take a look at these Pentel color brushes. They're ink brushes. This happens to be a set that contains 3 different colored inks in the brushes and then 1 extra medium Pentel Aquash brush, which I use all the time anyway, so it was nice that it came in this packet as a bonus. The 3 pen colors inside of this particular box are gray, sepia, and black. These are dye-based inks, so they're going to tend to not be as light fast as, say, a permanent India ink or something like that. So just keep that in mind. And they're still really great for sketchbook work, but if you're going to do a finished piece, you might want to reconsider a different ink. Now, these are refillable pens, so you could theoretically stick any kind of ink in these pens that isn't shellac based, because shellac based ink will just dry out your bristle tip, and you don't want that to happen. But if you were to put other types of inks in here that weren't shellac based, you could probably use these pens just fine with that. Now you'd have to clean them out and stuff, but they are refillable with their own colors as well. So that's one thing to keep in mind, and that's if the bristle tips on these, the brushes, they're nylon, if they're intact, and they usually hold up pretty well, definitely encourage you refilling these, because it's really easy and simple to do. You can just either buy the cartridge itself and just screw it right on, or you can use I believe you could take it apart and use a dropper to put other ink in there. So it's a little tricky because there is a kind of a little valve in there, but definitely doable. You see the little white valve in there, you'd have to take that out, but you could definitely do it. And that little ring there that you remove, you just remove that and then screw the cap back on, and then that pushes down on that valve and allows the ink to flow into the pen. One thing to keep in mind is this loosens and tightens in the opposite direction that you might think if you're using like a USB or a US-based righty-tighty, lefty-loosey approach. It's the opposite with these made in Japan Pentel pens. So once you remove those collars, those red collars, then the pens are almost ready to go. Not quite. You're going to have to give them a squeeze, maybe shake them a little, but then we'll take a quick look at that. And then the ink will start to flow down into the pen and eventually to the bristle brush tip, and then you're able to use it no problem at all. I'm just going to have to give it a few squeezes here, and you can start to see the ink come down in the pen, and the more you squeeze it, the more it pushes that ink down in. Once the ink is down into the bristles of the brush, you won't have to do as much squeezing or anything like that. You just squeeze a little and it all comes down. But initially you do have to give it a bit of a squeeze and a shake maybe. Once that paint is in the bristles, you can see it begin to flow in there. Don't squeeze and shake it over your work. Otherwise, it does have a tendency to gather paint in there and will splatter or drop out of the tip. So once you get it down there, it's pretty straightforward. Just use it like a regular brush with ink, and away you go. A little bit more about the basics of these pens. They're about like 7.5 inches long, maybe 8 inches long with the cap on. Once you take it off, it's down to like 6.5 inches or something. They don't feel heavy in the hand at all. They feel really light, as a matter of fact. And once you get through this initial work of squeezing the ink down into the bristle tip, you're not going to have to do that work again unless you replace the cartridge. Once you get it down there, it stays down there. You can put the cap on there, and it's just fine. As long as you make sure that your cap is on and sealed well, you shouldn't have any trouble at all with the ink. It's not shellac-based ink, so it's a dye-based ink, so it's not going to dry out and stiffen your bristles or anything like that. And anyway, if they do get a little stiff, you can re-wet them really quick. So they are re-wettable, even though they say they're pigment-based ink. They're really a dye-based ink. They're not super light fast outside of a sketchbook, so I wouldn't use these necessarily for for say finished work that you want to hang and it's going to be in direct light or anything like that. But if you're just doing sketches and sketchbook work, I think that's just fine. And the price point is really reasonable. Now, one thing I will say is if you get, they have these replacement cartridges that just snap on there, and they are a little proprietary in that there's a little white valve in the bottom of the pen where the ink reservoir is. But if you can get past that and get some ink in there, you can use any kind of ink that isn't shellac based. So in other words, you could refill this with any kind of ink you wanted to, and you'd be just fine. So yeah, I was just testing it out a little here, and each of the colors just to see what they were like. Like I said, I love the sepia color. It's really a cool color, and the ink is really dark in the black. One thing I did really want to try was wet on wet here, so I wet the paper then and kind of just started using the pen on the wet. So I got some interesting effects there, but they work great wet on wet. And you can re-wet these. So despite kind of the advertisement on this, you can re-wet these pretty easily. Now, the best way to get good ink washes, in my opinion, is to use your wet brush on the ink before it's dry. Once it's dry, you can re-wet it, but it won't move the ink around as easy as it will if you use it when the ink is wet. So yeah, just messing around with these, like really good feel, just a little bit of a squeeze and you can get more ink down in it, but it's almost, the frequency with which you have to do that is almost infrequent enough that you don't even notice. So, you just, if the tip gets dry, you just give it a squeeze and there you go. Now, I use the extra Aquash pen to get some ink wash effects on the drawings I'm going to do here. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that because that comes in this 4-pack, 3 ink pens and then the 1 Aquash, which I'm using right here, and which I use all the time in my regular day-to-day use. So let's talk about just a couple more things about these that are worth highlighting. You can use this with other water-based media, so like gouache or other watercolor, any kind of water-based media, you can use them together. They work pretty well. In addition to that, this synthetic or nylon tip on this brush pen is really good. It's just like the Aquash, probably the same tip anyway. Seems to be about a medium tip, and it bounces back in shape and everything. So probably get a lot of good life out of that. I know the regular Pentel Aquash pens last forever. I've used a single brush for like 5 years, but eventually sort of the bristles split off or the brush gets a little bit out of shape and you pretty much have worn it out. They're not expensive to replace, which is great. Neither are these ink wash pens, but you don't have to replace the whole pen. You can just get a new ink cartridge unless your tip wears out. Again, don't refill with shellac-based inks, but any other kind of ink should work well in these. And yeah, I recommend these Pentel ink brushes for anyone who wants to use that for like a sketch application. So long for now. This has been Marty for owingsart.com.